The following is a presentation of the Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
From the birthplace of modern winemaking, Sonoma, California, welcome to The Winemakers. Local experts Sam Couturi, Bart Hansen, and Brian Casey, along with host John Myers, invite you to listen in as they discuss all facets of winemaking. So sit back, pour yourself a glass, and let's hear what the guys have to say this week.
What a weird color that wine is.
It's got saffron in the bottom of it.
It's rosé-ish. It's Grenache rosé.
Oh, that explains it then.
It's
And
20.
it's got some age on it.
And it's 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
2020.
Well, it's
I hope I can still taste it.
420.
420.
Yeah.
420, 2020. 420, 2020, we were definitely not passing joints to each other.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Winemakers. I'm John Myers.
No, that was the time of
a whole new
Personal
group here.
joints.
personal
Yeah.
joints, right?
We've got
Thank
Tristan hanging in for Brian, who's on special assignment. And, of course, we have Sam Couturi and Bart Hansen. And our special guest, well, first of all, we are coming to you.
Brian
from-
Casey's hovering around.
Yeah, we're coming to you from Grateful Dead headquarters in Sonoma, California on 420. So I have no idea what's going to happen later. However, I will introduce.
Hey, you have an idea of what's going to happen later.
Yeah, because I'm all prepared. So.
Yeah, but does 420 really mean anything if it happens on a daily basis anyway?
You know,
Mind blown.
we're so on brand and off topic. I had a time in my life where on 420 I didn't smoke pot, just to
Be different.
Yeah, just to be different. Or at least I tried to not.
Set yourself apart. Yeah.
That's what you told yourself when you got up in the
Right, when I
morning?
woke up in the morning, I'm like, and then and then your dad calls and your boss calls.
Let's welcome our guest, Sasha Berleman. You're the director of Fire Forward here in the area. And there is no Audubon Canyon Ranch, right? Actually,
There is.
There is.
The Audubon Canyon Ranch is out by Bolinas, right?
Yeah, it is now the Martin Griffin Preserve.
Yes.
There you
It got
go.
rebranded.
But anyway, Fire Forward, a nonprofit here in the area. And of course, Barbara Gorderer, who actually connected everybody here. So wave at Barbara over in the corner.
Hey,
Hi, Barbara.
She's sitting there on her computer hanging out.
She's working.
Yeah,
She's with a glass of rosé.
Why not?
How is the 2020 rosé tasting, you guys?
We got an
Sounds
awesome. There you
Right.
go.
Yeah.
Well, welcome everybody. So there you go. What a fun day. You got a beautiful day here to talk about Fire Forward.
Perfect. It's
Yeah.
beautiful out.
And Tristan is here because he's done a bunch of controlled fires anyway. So yeah, he's our brains today. So
No, Dr. Sasha Berleman is our brains today.
They brought out the big
you
gun.
didn't tell me it was doctor.
Yes, Dr. Sasha Berleman. I don't go by doctor though. 'Cause I
You don't
can't
lead
really
with
say
that?
my names too well.
Hi, Doc.
Your PhD is in fire science, right?
Wildland fire science with a focus on fire ecology and prescribed fire use for benefiting ecosystems.
Wow.
Yeah.
I've never even heard of that. Amazing. Seriously.
Yeah.
So you must go nuts in the fire season around here.
Go nuts. That's there are lots of ways to interpret that. Definitely a busy year round, actually doing prescribed burns, and then even during wildfire season, sometimes prescribed burning as well, depending. But yeah, over time, wildfire season has had different meanings for me because yeah, I spent some years on a hotshot crew and detail with the Forest Service on wildfires in the summer sometimes, and then
What an
Yeah.
experience. I mean, that's got to be just the ultimate horror show.
Once you're in that work, it's kind of like any emergency response work you do what you're trained to do, right? So you're there with your team of colleagues, and you're having a good time. You all trust each other, know each other, and you know what your job is, and you're just taking care of it. Yeah, it's not too bad. I mean, in wildland fire with the Forest Service, a lot of the time we're out in kind of the more wilderness type areas, so it's beautiful.
Well,
out.
you make it sound a little easier than I'm sure it is. I mean, I can't imagine me doing it, Sam. So.
I will say, from my very much limited experience in this, that there's nothing better than when a hotshot crew shows up. When you see the hotshot crew driving through when you're have snuck behind evacuation lines, and you see the hotshot crew show up, you're like, all right, well, it's better than, you know, us with our shovels and hose and garden hoses. That's like when the Forest Service hotshot crew shows up, then you know it's like a serious thing and it's getting taken care of, right? I mean, that was my feeling about it, you know. So.
Did I hear you say sneaking behind fire lines, sir?
I think the statute of limitations is up. I don't know what it is, but I've heard that people do that somehow.
Does he have a tie-dyed T-shirt on?
Yes.
Let him through.
Pretty much. That's that.
I mean, is it really sneaking if you just know a way that they don't know? Right?
Yes,
You know.
it is. I think so. I think I do. I do believe. Sasha, you grew up in
Doctor.
You grew up in Temecula.
I did.
Doesn't to me strike as like a wild land. Although there's lots of fires in Southern California. How do you end up doing the work that you do?
Yeah, actually, Temecula, you know, it sits in the bottom of a valley surrounded by chaparral-covered hillsides. So while my home itself was never threatened growing up, wildfire was a big part of what I grew up seeing and experiencing. We had smoke days instead of snow days. We had, like, you know, I'd go outside and catch white ash in my hand like it was snowflakes. It'd be covering the lawn. The lawn would just be pure white. And, you know, as a teenager, I would go with my friends and we'd drive these backcountry roads that we knew and we'd watch wildfires burn.
Wow.
So it was a big thing for me. All my friends were evacuated at some point, so we'd go and help them evacuate. So yeah, I had night terrors as a kid about wildfire, and it was a big deal. So, you know, teenagers kind of didn't really know what the options were for career paths, but once I found this as a career path, it was a done deal.
From the beginning.
Well, so how did that start? Did you start working at a fire department?
No, I actually I did community college down south and was told to go take a docent training at a nature preserve that I used to go to, and they had a guest speaker who was an indigenous man from the area who told us for the first time that I'd ever heard about it, about how prescribed fire was used to steward that preserve for thousands of years. And that was this mind-blowing moment to me that, like, I was 19 at the time and I'd never heard of the benefit and value and meaning of fire on the landscape to the plants and people and animals. And then all of a sudden here at 19 years old, I hear that for the first time when I'd been terrified of fire since I was a little kid. So that really struck me. And at the time I was taking an environmental science class, it was just so depressing. I felt like there was no chance that we could get through like my lifetime and still be thriving as a human race. Right. And so this little glimpse felt like something I could jump
That's
into.
still questionable, you know.
Yeah.
Whether we're going to make
It is
through.
still questionable, but you know, I feel like now I have a sense of purpose. At least if I'm going to be here, I have like this thing that I'm trying to make a difference in.
So I don't want to stop you from telling us how you got there, but one thing can we come back to is I'd like to hear what that first introduction, what he said to you guys, and you know, kind of what it was to hit those points. Yeah,
so you know, this was well over a decade now ago, so the details are a little fuzzy on his specific points, but I do remember it was the first time.
That's right, the statute of limitations.
Yeah. It was the first time I ever heard about fire-dependent flowers. So in chaparral ecosystems, there are flowers that'll wait dormant in the soil for over 100 years for a fire to burn through, and then that opens the seed coat, and you get these beautiful wildflower blooms that, you know, no one in our lifetime has seen. Yeah. And that just shocked me. I thought that was so incredible that there's that much dependence on fire in the ecosystem that some plants just cannot exist without it. And then we've got vernal pools that up there that without fire, all of those wildflowers get overrun by annual grasses. They also had oak woodlands up there, and he was talking about stewarding those oak woodlands to reduce the pest infestation so the acorns would be edible and harvestable. So all of these purposes, and I'm sure many more that he talked about that I don't remember now.
I just wanted you to hit kind of the basics.
Well, and that's why you're here today. I mean, this is a wine podcast. Why are we talking to somebody who does prescribed burns? And from the wine standpoint, you know, especially in the last 5 years, everybody talks about smoke damage and smoke taint and wildfires in the wine industry. But what you're doing is fire that is good for the wine industry. And so that's why we brought you here today. Will you just kind of talk more about the prescribed burn process a little bit, and how that good fire kind of differs from bad fire, both as we experience it as humans, but also maybe how the wildlands experience it.
Yeah,
that was a big question. Sorry.
No,
you can break it into parts.
I think I've got at least some of it, and I think a good place to start is a little backstory here. I think we have all realized now in California that there is no fire option. Like, suppression does not work. It cannot work. And none of us thrive under a suppression model. Right. All that does is really will you just say what suppression model means? Yeah. So start from the beginning. Basics. So in the last 150 or so years, we've been living under this model that, we need to put out all fires. There was a 10 a.m. rule for a while. All fires should be put out by 10 a.m. the next morning. So just like absolutely eliminate fire from the landscape, remove indigenous people, make it a felony to light fire, so that we criminalize it, and essentially just created this system where we want nothing to burn. We expect that we can keep anything from burning at all. And what we found is that accumulates a lot of dead material on the landscape. And what that ends up doing is, one, it degrades ecosystems, but it also means that when a wildfire burns and we can't catch it because we cannot catch them all, and we know that, we get much more dramatic fire behavior. And nowadays, we have that being coupled with climate change, where our fire seasons are much longer than they used to be, or even some would argue year round. And we have more extreme weather events, like stronger winds with, our rains come in big pulses, and then we get big dry spells with hotter and drier conditions. So what we see as a result of all of that suppression is much more dramatic fire behavior. And when those fires roll through, they're not benefiting people by any means, but they're also not benefiting the landscape anymore, because they're burning outside of the natural behavior that those ecosystems are adapted to. When we look at our ecosystems in California, most of them are adapted to very frequent low intensity prescribed fire behavior. So our oak woodlands, tend to be somewhere in the every 3 years to every 15, maybe up to 20 years. Redwoods are in that same kind of range, every 4 to 20 years. Grasslands every 3 to 5 years at most. So when you start thinking about these numbers and how frequently each of these ecosystems are expected to see fire, and have that be low, short flame lengths that move slowly through the forest floor kind of thing, we're way out of whack for what we should be seeing in California.
And I've heard at some point the sort of deficit of fire in California, and those numbers are like mind-boggling. I don't know if you know them off the top of your head, like how much naturally needs to burn in California, and how what that number is between what is actually burned and what needs to burn. Yeah,
so I only remember some of these numbers off the top of my head, but I think I can pull some of them. So prehistorically, so before the suppression era started, with colonization, we were seeing about 2.5 million acres per year burning in California, which in, about 10 years ago, that was equivalent of all of the fire burning across the U.S. in an extreme fire decade. And just in the last 5 years, we had one wildfire season that matched that 2.5 million acres with very different fire behavior from what that 2.5 million acres was prehistorically. So now we're getting bad enough with our wildfire seasons that they are matching that acreage, but we're not accomplishing the objectives at all, or in most places, I should say, with those.
And what is that objective?
So those objectives being, seeing fire behavior shifting as it moves into different ecosystems and on different topographies across the landscape. So if all of these landscapes were tended and had that fire return interval that they're adapted to, even in those more extreme weather conditions, we could see fire behavior, maybe it has big, like long flame lengths and moving fast through a chaparral, and then it hits an oak woodland, and that fire behavior drops down, and then it moves into a forest, and it's even more mellow, and then it picks up again when it hits the bottom of a south-facing slope. So we would expect to see these kind of patches and mosaic patterns in fire behavior with fire moving through well-tended ecosystems, but we don't see that right now.
It sounds like there's a tremendous amount of science behind fire behavior. It really does.
There is, yeah. There have been quite a few people.
PhDs
I would say,
even.
yeah,
absolutely.
PhDs even. I would say there's thousands of years of traditional ecological knowledge, which is its own kind of science on fire behavior, and then definitely in the last 80 years, a lot of Western science diving into fire behavior as well.
Well, and that's actually one of the first places that I heard about more sort of proactive prescribed burns was at the Eco Farm conference that we do down in Monterey every year. And it was a native-led group, and I'm forgetting the name both of the tribe and of the organization, that was kind of doing something, I think, similar to what Fire Forward is doing, which is going to private landowners, going to public lands, and doing these burns the way that the native populations in California did for, centuries, right?
Yeah, and so, there are a couple things happening these days. There are still tribes burning in California across the state, and especially a very active prescribed burn program in the tribes up in the Klamath.
Okay.
And then also through other pockets throughout the state.
I think this was like Central Coast. That
Yeah, that makes sense. And then there's this model that's kind of spread from the Midwest, which you might be familiar with, and has come into California in recent years, called the Prescribed Burn Association model. And what that is, in the West or in the Midwest, that model is really ranchers coming together who are neighbors and helping each other do large blocks of prescribed burns as cooperative burning. And out here, we're seeing that Prescribed Burn Association models are hugely diverse. And the one that we have in northern Sonoma, or in the North Bay area, including Sonoma, is the Good Fire Alliance. So that's the name of our Prescribed Burn Association. And in our case, that's a 700-member community now of folks from all different backgrounds. So some of them are land managers, some of them work in the wine industry or grow grapes or work in vineyards, picking grapes and harvesting. Some are, land owners who want to be putting fire on their own land. And some are like baristas or restaurant workers or computer coders or graphic designers who have been impacted by the traumas of the recent wildfires and want to contribute and reshape their relationship with fire. And these folks are coming together, gaining these skills as a community, and then putting fire on the ground in that restorative process in community. And it's been hugely effective. And I would say I see all the time these relationships with fire being healed from very traumatic experiences to really beautiful relationships.
That's awesome. I love that. I love that concept. I mean, I don't think there's anybody at this table who doesn't feel some trauma from 17, from 2020, and facing that head on and actually going out and, supporting whether actually doing it or supporting somehow these efforts, really has massive catharsis, right? Yeah. Is that a good word, Tristan?
I think that's a great word, Sam. I mean, coming from a Midwestern background where fire is not such an existential threat year on year, but is slowly reintegrating into our sense of regenerative ecology, growing up on an organic farm, having the opportunity to take part in several burns in the last few years. Something I'd love to get to, Sasha, is like the experiential aspect of actually conducting, and the name of the game is control here, controlled burns. In California, how does it look like? What sort of team makeup do you have? I love the sort of captain analogy of it's like a ship. Someone's got to be in charge at all times, and it's as my father's partner, who's a horticulturalist, always says, it's sort of top-down model. How does that look for you guys on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, and and I have on that same question. I've been to a control burn and was in awe when you saw the fire kind of get up and going. And then I think it was when it hit a patch that they expected it, but as being someone not ready for it, it's quite amazing. And it makes you think about, when it's out there, So if you could add in some thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I keep backtracking on these questions. So
That's good. Keep us on track.
A little bit of
please.
background.
It's
So
up to you.
my program, we're a prescribed fire capacity building program, and kind of have really stepped into a prescribed fire training center role. So we're a hub where all of these community members are coming together to get the training and knowledge that allows them to then be able to be on the fire line and implement these skills and build that experience base. In prescribed fire, and in fire in general, we have this saying that you're always a student of fire. You're never done learning and growing these skills, and that's true for all of us. And so my program's been going out and teaching these community members. I think we've taught about 500 people now to certified about 500 people to the basic wildland firefighter level, which is the national standard for being on the fire line. And that's just so that we have a foundation for all of these folks who are coming out. And then when we do a prescribed burn, some of the burns require that basic training as the standard based on complexity or landowner preference, and then others don't, depending, if it's lower risk or in the middle of winter, or the landowner feels comfortable without that in there. And then we structure the burn team so that we have what we call span of control, kind of to your point, Tristan. So we work in teams of 3 to 7, ideally 5, and then those burn teams will have a squad leader, and those squad leaders have a crew lead, and the engines work for a holding boss, and the crew might work for a firing boss, and then we have a burn boss. So there is a formal structure so that we have accountability for everyone, and in our community, we mostly call that the span of accountability. It goes both ways, and we're a community burning together, right? So rather than that kind of militant top down, it's still organized in that chain of command structure, but we're saying like everyone's accountable to each other, and we want to make sure we're working as a team. If you see something that seems odd, say something about it, ask a question. Let's make sure we're all learning and all contributing. And everyone has knowledge and skills to contribute, right? They may just be different and more diverse. And then there's this long planning and permitting process. I say long, but it actually sometimes comes together really quickly if there's a really ready partner with a really good burn unit option and they're engaged and willing to put in the effort. Sometimes it's a 1 to 2 month turnaround from a question about whether there's an opportunity to burn to getting fire on the ground. And other times it takes a year and a half, or even longer, depending on what the situation is. And so, we reach out to local fire departments. We bring together the Good Fire Alliance community. We organize and structure that. And then there's a morning briefing, and we start a test fire first. And that's where we identify what the fire behavior is likely to do and decide whether we're going to meet the objectives that we laid out. We always have objectives when we're doing a prescribed burn. Otherwise, you're basically just an arsonist, right? So you have to really know why you're putting fire on the ground if you're going to light that match. So we always have goals and objectives really clearly defined. Yeah. And permits are a distinguishing feature there too. So.
Right. Between a prescribed burn and an arsonist permit. I like it.
Permits and objectives, really important things to have.
I was just going to ask Sam about, you mentioned arson. What are the main reasons, the top 3 or 4 reasons for fires start in California now?
So actually, in general, I think people are the main cause of fire, and it is usually unintentional, right? That's the more frequent one. Right. Yeah, usually unintentional, although arson is definitely a part of it. But a trailer chain dragging along the highway.
Trailer chain drag is like one that's so common, and people have no idea. And then you just keep driving along. You don't even know that you started a fire.
Yeah,
yep.
and I've seen that before, and I get so angry.
Yeah, right.
Anytime
if you have that trauma too, yeah, it's rough. So, humans.
So it's just a spark from.
Just be a spark. At this point, people throw cigarettes out their windows anymore. I don't know. Probably.
I think it happens.
Does anybody smoke anymore?
They do.
Cigarettes?
Cigarettes? I don't know.
It was behind someone just the other day.
Yeah. Yeah, it happens. Lightning also, but not in our region so much. Right. We have the anomaly years that are decades apart from each other, where we get a bunch of lightning that actually has ground strikes, but mostly lightning is up in the Sierras and not down in this part of California. So mostly human or human related ignitions, like power lines, things like that, of course.
So, we've seen a lot more hoofed animals in our vineyards this year than ever. And it's been great. And I've also seen, and we have past friend of the pod who, they graze animals out in the forested areas. And there's a particular place I'm thinking of. They've had some goats in there for a while, and they've made huge inroads, but it still looks like it would burn. Is that an appropriate time to bring in a control burn? Because I imagine you don't want to get into those really, really poorly managed properties, right? How do you help out someone like that?
That is a great question. I'm glad you asked. So goats are awesome for reducing brush that's kind of in that interlayer between the forest floor and the canopy. Right. But surface fuels really drive fire behavior, and surface fuels are the dead material that's above the soil surface but on the ground. And goats are not eating the dead material on the forest floor, they're eating the brush. And so they can be super excellent for opening up that understory. It definitely makes it easier for igniters to then walk through for a controlled burn, and it drops fire behavior nicely. You get shorter flame lengths because the fuels are compacted and low. So absolutely, after goats go through is a great time for a prescribed burn. I would say though, first entry treatment using prescribed fire, that's what we call it, where a landscape or a forest has been unmanaged, no treatment whatsoever, and then we do prescribed fire as the first thing, can actually be really effective, and it's very cost effective too. The main thing that we have to do for those burns is, well, there are two things to consider for those burns. One, you still have to prep the perimeter. So we're looking at usually something like 30 feet around the edge, where we are trying to get rid of any heavy accumulations of fuel. So like logs, dead trees that are still standing, stumps, we want to get those out of that first 30 feet and distribute it in. And then usually also doing some pruning up of the canopy, things like that, just so you're getting minimal fire behavior and minimum amount of time that fire is burning in that perimeter to help with that control piece. And then the other piece is we have to work with the landowners on what they're looking for, because if a landowner is doing prescribed fire as their first entry treatment, it's aesthetically not amazing immediately, because you're going to leave a bunch of dead standing material in the understory after that first burn, but your fire risk is immediately reduced because the surface fuels are gone. And you just have this kind of scraggly looking, dead looking understory. And if you just do another burn or two burns a couple years later, then you can end up with that beautiful kind of park-like atmosphere. But for a few years in between, it looks kind of meh, but your fire risk is gone.
Yeah. And it's interesting. We've seen those properties where landowners have gone in and cleaned up all the dead stuff. And it does. It looks like a park.
Well, and then you also see, I see this a lot, and that, thinking of a place that you probably drive by all the time on Orwam Road, where a year or two ago they went in and aggressively cut out all the understory and little trees, dead trees, but it's actually come back harder and faster, especially with this winter, where it's like now it's all oil brush and bay growing, because they had access to more sunshine and all those things. Right. All of a sudden, and that's probably a great time to go in and try and burn that out a little bit, right?
It can be. So there are a couple of things here too. What we see is a lot of people want to immediately have that park-like look, and they bring in a chipper. Right. And they chip all that material and they leave the chips on the floor. And what you've done is just compounded the surface fuels, and you've made it this compact dry layer in the middle of summer, so that, or by the end of summer, if a fire burns there, it's really slow, extremely hot burning fire. It just girdles all the trees and kills all the trees you left behind, and it's really hard to fight fire in that thick, incredible heat. And so I really advise, when I'm working with landowners, please do not chip and leave the chips. You can chip and take the chips elsewhere, but don't chip and leave the chips on site.
What about just
broadcasting them.
broadcasting.
Yeah, if you
It's
want
the same
to,
thing.
it's doing the same thing, unless you can really make it a very thin layer, or you're in an extremely wet climate or snowy climate. In this area, we're just not getting consistent enough rain and enough of it to really decompose those chips faster than the risk of wildfire could show up. And it makes it much harder to do a prescribed burn. So I like to tell people, if you're going to do something that's not prescribed fire first, then you can do a lop-in like pile. I like to tell people to burn piles so they're not adding to the fuels on the surface. Sometimes lop and scatter can be appropriate, but it has to be a pretty light touch so that they're not adding too much to that surface fuel.
Right. Don't want to exacerbate the existing problem.
Yeah, exactly.
Can you speak to a little bit of how this season is shaping up with the multiple atmospheric rivers we've had across the regions in which you do prescribed burns?
Yeah, it's so complicated. Heavy rain years often mean tall grass crop, and I hear a lot of this narrative in recent years where I hear, tall grass crop means big wildfire season. And that's not really a direct correlation. What tall grass crop means is that fire behavior in your grasslands, when people are doing initial attack on that in the suppression industry, that's going to be more fire behavior for firefighters to put out with a hose. But that's not a driver of mega fires, right? Yeah. We know that like these big wind events, these big intense weather events are the mega fire drivers in this area. And those are contributed to by both the weather and very dry fuels. And, partway through this season, I was 100% under the impression we are still very much at risk of those fuels being very dry this summer and contributing to major fire possibilities. After all of the rain that came in, we did see an improvement in the drought index. So there is a chance that that'll be better this year. Seeing that improvement in the drought index was a huge hallelujah to me. But it's also going to depend on how hot and dry the summer is. So there's, we got to look ahead at what are we facing in terms of summer weather behavior.
What are they saying about how many last winters do we need in a row to get us completely out of the drought? I mean, have you heard those numbers or anything?
What Sasha was referring to, the California, I guess the National Weather Service puts this together, basically has the entire state of California out of drought after this winter. But if we get another winter like, 2020 or something like that, we'll probably go right back into it by the time, by our 420 show next, 2024, we'll be back into drought if the
It's
sort
just
of
a matter of-
regular patterns
Right.
exist. So
Right.
if we get another winter like last winter, I don't know how much sort of bankability there is as far as whether we're in drought or not in drought. I know that there's been a lot of groundwater recharge, and including some very intentional groundwater recharge in the Central Valley and stuff like that. But another dry winter, and I think we're back to the same conversation that we had these last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, and maybe not where we were last year, right? I mean,
Where
where we
everything
were.
is maroon on the
Right.
map, extreme
Yeah.
drought.
Right.
Extreme.
So we'll start going back. We'll start doing that again, though.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
What this year tells me, though, or from my kind of mental framework, is that this is a great year to do some really good prescribed burning, because we're not in that drought. There is more moisture in the trees. There's more moisture in the soil and in the duff layer. So this is a great time to get out there and reduce the amount of dead accumulated fuel while we have that moisture, so that in future years when we don't have that moisture, that's been treated and taken care of.
So let's say there's some thoughtful landowner out there listening to our show, and he's like, I want to do something about this on my property that I haven't done a good job on. Are you guys a resource for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So our program does all this training and capacity building, and part of that is also just getting fire on the ground. One, so that we can put smoke in the air and have these conversations about the importance of prescribed burn and how they're done and how they can be done diligently and safely, and to provide training opportunities on the ground for folks, and to just get the work done. It would not, our program would not be meaningful if we were only talking about prescribed burning and not doing it. So we do private landowner site visits and kind of consultations. We usually do a pre-screening phone call to talk with them about what they've got. And then if it sounds like there's a viable opportunity there, we'll go out to their site and we'll talk with them about, what are your objectives for prescribed fire and what we see as the objectives, so we can kind of do some landowner education there and collaboration. And then what are the containment line opportunities? So with all of these prescribed burns, we're always looking for really good containment line options. And that can either be a pre-existing road or trail, or we can create the line that we need to make a prescribed burn feasible. And it's really done in partnership, because this is community and cooperative based burning. It takes some effort from the landowner and contribution, and it definitely takes community contribution. And then our program is bringing in a lot of that prescribed fire specific expertise. Yeah.
How many are there how many controlled burns are in this particular area? How many would you like to see, and what would be perfect?
Yeah, so I think last year our program did something like 45 prescribed burns in the year, and I think we're probably doing more in this coming year, and looking to do more that are larger acreages as well. And, we do prescribed burns. It's interesting. Acreage is really challenging in this region as a metric of success, because we have so many different ecosystems in such small areas in this region, and then such kind of interesting terrain. And then the landowner parcels are, wide range, from very small parcels of intermix and interface homes with wildlands on them, and then very large properties. So I would love to be seeing much more prescribed burning. While our program in this past year conducted 45 burns, it's somewhere around there, I think our partners who we've trained over the last 5 years have done another 35 on top of that. So we're already seeing a lot of the benefit and impact of all the people that we've been training. But I'd love to just keep seeing that scale up. It should be a lot more than that. And part of what we're doing this year to move that direction is we're planning a prescribed fire training exchange, which is a 10-day event of cooperative burning in the region that's going to take place in September. And so we're going to be kind of moving into that summer burn window, the part of summer where there's usually relatively cool weather, and not so much of those extreme weather events. And sometimes there's even a little bit of rain in September, and going to be trying to reduce those fuels in that kind of later part of the summer using that effort.
Is Fire Forward statewide, or is this just local?
We're a local program for the most part right now. So our implementation is really tons in Sonoma County, and then some in Marin, some in Mendocino, Lake, and Napa counties. But really Sonoma County is kind of our home base, with Marin being a second runner-up.
Will you talk a little bit about the sort of the program, the training part of the program, and the education? Because that's a place where it seems like, you've already talked about it, scaling a little bit, but starts in Sonoma County, but can really be statewide, regional as you build that program, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say we're on a lot of committees and policy efforts that go more at that statewide level or even beyond the state. But our trainings, we're sponsored to teach National Wildfire Coordinating Group courses, which is the national federal certification system for fire. And right now our program teaches, I think, about 8 different courses or 9 different courses in that system. So we can teach those formal certifications to folks, and that includes everything from basic wildland firefighter to wildland fire chainsaws, to pumps and hoses and how to set up those systems for fire, ignition operations, teaching people what the patterns are and how to moderate fire behavior using your ignition patterns on any given burn to meet objectives. And then we teach a burn boss class, the California State Certified Burn Boss class, in our program as well.
I could do the pump and hose class for sure.
Well, I don't want a lot of things on my resume, but burn boss would be a dope thing to have on your resume, right? What is a burn boss? How do you get that? Can I just call my?
Well, it's got to be better than just going out and tossing a match into your woods out back. I mean,
Yes.
Please don't do that at home.
No.
Yeah, there are families with that institutional knowledge. Tristan, you might have grown up in a family that knows how to do prescribed burns, and all of these certifications are kind of meaningless, right? I don't know.
Some degree, but yeah.
Yeah. So lots of
value.
families like that out there that have that institutional knowledge just in the family, or traditional ecological knowledge, right? There are those pathways. But for those of us who weren't lucky enough to grow up in those families or systems, these certification courses are a helpful and formal way to show the knowledge and training that you've gotten. And then we have these processes that we use from the Forest Service or federal landscape as well that are called task books, where you can work your way through a task book with a trainer that's formally evaluating you in all of these tasks toward these positions. So all of these courses kind of feed into prerequisite requirements for different positions. And those go from kind of your crew member or basic wildland firefighter level to squad boss, which is a leader of a team of 3 to 7 firefighters, to crew boss, which is a leader of a 20 to 25 person team, or engine boss. So that's kind of called the single resource boss level, where you're in charge of a single resource on the fire line, whether that's an engine or a crew, or you're running dozers or any other kinds of things. And then after that is incident commander. So that's someone who's in charge of a wildfire. And then after that, in the federal system, is burn boss. And that's the federal burn boss level. That's a moderate complexity. And that usually takes people like 12 years and some wildfire experience, and quite a bit of wildfire experience and prescribed burn experience to get to that qualification. But the state, California.
And you are a burn boss, right?
I'm going for my final evaluation
Okay.
after 12 years of working my way diligently toward that, for that federal burn boss qualification in a week.
Okay.
So,
I just want to be able to introduce you as Sam Burn
Right.
Boss
Burn Boss
Katuri.
it is
Yeah.
such a great title.
Watch out for Sam. He's a Fed
I'm
now.
a federal burn boss.
But California, because we had this issue of, we have the need for prescribed fire outside of federal lands. We have a lot of private lands and non-federal lands that are in need of prescribed fire, and there wasn't any separate qualification system for doing that. And the federal qualification system requires so many years and so many years also of wildfire experience that the state had Senate Bill SB 1260 laid out the requirement to create a state certification system for burn bosses. And that happened around 2018, 2019. I was on the cadre for that. And we set up a certification system that says, you know what, the fire agencies are going to be there. The state and local fire agencies are going to be on these burns and be ready to respond. And so we don't need our burn bosses to have this amount of wildfire experience. It doesn't need to take 12 years for someone to diligently put fire on the ground. So let's come up with a certification that allows for people who don't work for a federal agency and don't have a decade of wildfire experience to plan and organize burns and lead those in a diligent manner. And so that's a new certification system. And that one doesn't require any wildfire experience for people to get it, but it does require a series of those other courses that I mentioned that our program teaches. And then it requires some experience and a task book evaluation from a qualified state certified burn boss.
So who's taking these certifications from Fire Forward? Can any of us sitting at this table sign up for a class? How does it work? I know that you've done a lot of work with like North Bay Jobs with Justice and different like native groups and stuff like that. So you talk about that a little bit, but how does, Joe Schmo start this process?
Yeah. So like I said, we have that 700 person community. We've trained up 500-ish of those people to basic wildland firefighter. And that really is like, we put out an announcement once or twice a year saying, hey, we're going to teach this basic wildland firefighter class, you need to take these prerequisite classes online. You need to go take a fitness test, and then you can come like be in this field day, and we'll issue you a certificate. And then people get experience on the ground from that, and it really is open to anyone who's interested in doing that, because we believe, you know, based in the fact that we live in a landscape that depends on people to steward these lands with fire. Fire belongs in the hands of the people, and so giving people the proper skills and training to be able to do that diligently is an important part of creating a better future in this state. So we offer that training, and then once people get experience with that basic wildland firefighter qualification, they become eligible to apply for those other courses that we teach that help build that experience and build them into leadership positions. So we have a fellowship program that we're finishing the second year of right now, where people who work for other partnering orgs and agencies, mostly land management orgs and agencies, can commit to a 300-hour professional development series over the course of 1 year with our program. And over that 1 year, we bring them from, having been on a number of prescribed burns, but still kind of in that early stage. They're competent and comfortable on the fire line in that crew member level, and they want to build their skills to become a state certified burn boss. And they commit to that 300 hours. And over the course of a year, we teach them a series of workshops and trainings and all of those courses to get them from comfortable on the fire line to planning, organizing, leading, and implementing their own prescribed burns. And we had 10 people in the first cohort, 15 in the second. We're dropping it down to 5 because we have other big initiatives coming up in the coming years. So really exciting program, and we've had a lot of success. People are getting jobs that are paying them to do prescribed burning, and people are really seeing like changes in their career paths that are building capacity toward this effort.
So we've obviously had a number of fires in the past 10 years in California, and a lot of those lands, well, first of all, who owns those lands just in general? Is it fed, state, or private, kind of the percentages in general? And then isn't this the time where now we should be doing prescribed burns on them to manage them? Because we did such a poor time
that have already wildfire.
Right. That have wildfired already. Isn't this the time now to go in and start managing it and managing it in this way?
Yeah. I think I was listening to your podcast episode with Dr. Kimberly Nicholas, and she said, it's more expensive to take care of a problem after it's already happened than it is to be on top of it before. That's really true in our region with wildfire. So there are parts of the state and certain wildfires where they burn and it really just like kind of, it hits the reset button, and now we can more easily do subsequent treatments. In this region, that's not as often the case as I really wish it was, because we have so many resprouting trees, and resprouting trees kind of shift the whole dynamic, because while they die on top, that dead canopy becomes more fuel, and then those bushes of resprouts are oily, and it takes forever for that ecosystem to transition back to a forest from a brush field of trees that are struggling to become trees again. So what we end up having to do to reset that and restore that is go in and like basically nudge the process through pruning of those resprouts down to just 3 or 4 stems.
So all the energy goes into it.
Yeah. Yep. Trying to get it to shift from brush back to a tree as quick as possible. And that seems to be pretty effective. And then you have to deal with all the dead material that's left standing. So often also cutting those and piling those and burning those. And then once that effort has kind of gotten underway, we're able to pretty effectively use prescribed fire to keep moving it in that direction. We are playing with, I wouldn't say playing, sorry, that's not the right word. We are working with experimenting
permitted play.
Yeah.
Permitted fire.
Yeah. We are experimenting with efforts to try to just do prescribed fire as a first entry treatment after those wildfires, where we let the fire let the prescribed burn kind of kill off some of those brush resprouts and try to just have that be the way that we reach that same endpoint. It seems like it maybe works. I don't have enough data yet to say it does work. It's a little bit tricky because oftentimes there's not even enough fuel across the surface after those wildfires to carry fire in the timeline that we need to knock back that brush. And so it's kind of tricky in between layer. But definitely I would say there's no time like the present for dealing with all of these places, whether it's burned in a wildfire or not. It's good to be doing this work.
What role does invasive species remediation have in California controlled burns? I know elsewhere in the country, with autumn olive in particular in the Midwest, that's been a huge plus. Is that a major part of it as well?
Yeah, in California, or at least in this part of California, our invasive species focus with fire is really focused largely on grasslands, and it's improving forage for cattle in a lot of cases, and at the same time, which is really cool, benefiting those ecosystems. So making more space for our native plants to thrive and for wildflowers to bloom. So species like Medusa head, goat grass, and yellow star thistle, we can really treat those very well. And there's a lot of science backing it using prescribed fire. Nice. Yeah. So those are some fun ones, and those types of burns are coming right up. In late May, we'll be doing a lot of prescribed burns to treat Medusa head, knock back the annual non-native grasses, and restore ecosystem health that way.
So where will we be working this spring and summer in Sonoma? I mean, I'm sure you have all these things planned out. Where should we be looking for good fire? Yeah,
you could expect to see some good prescribed burns happening late May, early June around the Sonoma Valley. Quite a bit in the Sonoma Valley. We do a lot of those projects, anything from Sears Point through Sonoma, Glen Ellen, and up to the Miacamas area. So Mark West watershed zone. So that whole string we'll be doing quite a bit in late May, early June, even maybe mid-June. And then September, we're really looking at probably doing some targeted prescribed burning around northwest Sonoma County. So up in the Fort Ross, Cazadero, Stewart's Point area.
Places that haven't burned since they were logged.
Yeah, and that'll be, using a lot of resources full time for 10 days to 2 weeks, just on site full time, making sure those burns go well.
Who do you want to get your message to? Who's your target audience?
That is a great question. My inclination is to say everyone, because we need everyone on board with this, whether they're help spreading the word of the role of fire in California, or they're coming out and putting fire on the ground, or they're telling their nervous neighbor that they should support this work, or they're helping nudge policy. So my inclination is to say everyone, but and everyone has a role to play, right, in creating the culture shift that we need to see meaningful change across the state and across the West and beyond. Immediately in this area, gosh, it's so hard to say not anything other than everyone, because there's the education component, teaching people about this, getting people comfortable with that idea. There's the training component, teaching people to do the work and implement it. There's the, and that may be volunteer labor, people treating their own properties or their neighbors' properties as a reciprocal effort. And then there's workforce development, teaching people how to do this so they can do it as a career, as a profession. And then there's moving the policy forward, moving the hurdles that keep this work from happening at pace and scale out of the way, and getting through those and over those. And then, teaching the future generations. So everything to little kids need to be learning about this.
Is there a federal counterpart to what you guys do?
So the feds have had a system for prescribed burning for quite a long time, hence the 12-year process to become a burn boss in the federal system. But
but then again,
only 12 years.
3 presidential administrations and
multiple
Olympics
PhDs later. Yeah.
What's the priority here?
But yeah, it's hard. There are a lot of challenges and hurdles involved in getting prescribed fire on federal land, but they have really good lessons learned from having been doing this a lot in kind of our modern context for quite a while. So in my program, we draw on the knowledge that the feds have built over the last many decades, all the time in the ways that we teach. And then and like the certifications that we issue and the standards and expectations we set for diligence and integrity. But then there are other ways of thinking that we incorporate too.
That you try to do it better than the way they do it.
Bart, I want to kind of go back to what you were talking about. Who owns these vast lands up north of us, between here and Eureka? It's a very deep and wide country.
Well, and I guess my kind of point is like I was looking to see who's doing the best job. Is it the feds? Is it the state? Is it the local? And just from your comment,
Sasha's doing the best job.
Right. It sounds like the feds aren't doing much. And so then it falls on to the grassroots of your own.
Yeah, the feds are doing what they can. They're trying, and there are really good people in the federal employment agencies that are putting their careers on the line.
They're not listening. Go ahead,
make things happen. Well, and then I would say I think there needs to be a very diversified series of teams with different approaches working to make this change, and the feds are a part of that. The state and local agencies are a part of that. And then these cooperative efforts and indigenous efforts are very much a part of that as well. And it's only with all of those voices in the room and all of those folks simultaneously working together to overcome those hurdles that we're actually going to see a meaningful landscape scale cultural shift that means that we can live better here in the future.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In that, today is 420. Can we talk about smoke a little bit?
Sure.
And the difference between good smoke and bad smoke.
Yes.
This is a wine podcast ostensibly. And certainly everybody's worried about smoke taint on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But the smoke from a prescribed fire is a very different situation than like the smokes that we dealt with in 2020 or 2017, like these wines we have in front of us.
Yeah.
We talk about that from.
Yeah, and there are some really great papers out nowadays really highlighting the differences between smoke from prescribed fires and smoke from wildfires. And I'm so grateful that research has really come forward now. But yeah, when we're doing prescribed burns, we're prepping the fuels as necessary, and then we're choosing our weather window and our burn window for the weather and wind that we want to see, and then we're actively managing our smoke, and part of the way that we do that is through our ignition techniques. We're also so that we can actually moderate how much smoke is being put in the air at a time and how well it lifts by the way that we ignite, and then the wind direction that we choose to burn under will kind of disperse it in one direction or another. And then the ceiling height, so how high the smoke lifts before it kind of mixes and disperses, all of that goes into it. And then we're also, we're burning these discrete units in these little kind of blips all over the map at a time, versus these mega wildfires that are, one, not only burning natural vegetation, but all sorts of other things that get burned in a catastrophic wildfire that really make that smoke dense and dirty. And then, burning millions of acres,
right,
and not under the weather conditions that allow for that to kind of disperse and move out, and just in such large quantities that there's no way for all that to disperse and move out. If it does, it just lands somewhere else that's problematic, like we've experienced here.
I mean, because you said something about earlier on about the fires that you're lighting as sort of the smoke being sort of the advertising that this work is happening. And I know that our industry, people hear that and they get really worried.
Yeah.
But I think the dispersion is really an interesting point, because it's the smoke that sits, and when it sits and what burned and how fresh it is and all these things that, we're learning about smoke damage and what it does to the grapes. But certainly those are factors, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And, different ecosystems and levels of degradation in different forests have different amounts of smoke that they put out as well, and we can measure that. That's measurable, and as part of our smoke management, when we submit our smoke management plans, we're measuring the particulate matter that we're expecting to have come off of the fuels that we're burning. And when we're burning in grasslands, that smoke is very light, very quick to disappear, because those grasses are so thin. We call them 1 hour fuels or fine fuels. that they just burn so fast and that smoke disappears. So we get that smoke to lift, and it's very wispy, very like light, and it disappears so fast. So all of those burns that we're doing in that late May, early June period, that's that really quick dispersing, within 10 minutes after ignitions are done, there's no smoke left.
Right. So basically you're waiting for those grasses to go to seed so you can and dry up like they do in late May, no matter how much rain we get. That's what it looks like
around that time. Right? Yeah, we're trying to catch it before. If we're burning for invasive species, we're catching it while those seeds are still on the plant, but the grasses are generally dry. Because once seeds drop off the plant and hit the soil surface, then there's not enough heat from the flame on the soil surface to kill them in grass. Okay. Yeah. So we're trying to hit, if we're trying to kill Medusa head, for instance, which is one that lots of ranchers don't want. Yep. So
those are like goat heads that'll like pop your bike tire too. Is that what they're?
No, that's the other one.
Yeah, I wonder if goat grass would pop a bike tire. Maybe, I don't know, but both of they look similar. But they just kind of get stuck to your pants, and the cows won't eat it because it has a high silica content.
Bike tire?
That would be pretty impressive.
No, I've ridden. I was a kid riding on the former railroad tracks that went by like Sebastiani Winery, and there was like 4 of us, and we were all on our bikes, and we went through a patch of goat heads is what I call it, and all of us, two tires each bike.
Oh my gosh,
16 tires. I don't even know, comical. And every tire was flat.
Oh my gosh,
we went through a patch of something.
Huh. Yeah. I wonder what that was.
I don't know, but hopefully you can burn it.
Yeah, we have been. That's something our program has been doing, which has been kind of fun. Is we have our team is a lot of fire ecologists on it, so we're all a little bit nerdy, and we have a pretty robust monitoring and research program, and we're constantly trying to build it and make it more robust, but we get inquiries all the time. So one of the ones that we got last year that we're acting on this year is, can you use fire to treat foxtails, which are the ones that people get all worried about their dogs' ears and all of that, and the
amount of money I've given my vet, I should donate it to you.
Right, exactly.
There you go.
Preventative foxtail treatment.
Yeah. We're doing some foxtail experiments this year, just seeing can you treat foxtail infestations in grasslands using prescribed fire? We've been doing some redwood burning for the last couple of years, learning a lot about how you can burn redwoods in the middle of winter. You can burn redwoods as a rainstorm comes in. They are so much more flammable than most of the other fuels we have in this region that, as in terms of when you ignite them, there's a lot that we can do in the very wet part of the season to be treating those landscapes when everything else is too wet to burn. And so we're doing a lot of research, and we've got academic partners who are supporting that research, trying to figure out what are these burn windows and how well can we accomplish these objectives when we're doing these burns in the middle of winter.
Did this winter, was there setbacks from this winter? Did it hamper your ability to do the fires that you were hoping to do because it kept raining and never stopped raining and then rained some more after that?
Yeah, I would say.
And then rained again.
Yeah, more rain and more rain. I would say prescribed fire, we're always kind of watching the weather and finding these pockets of windows, and then with all of the ecosystems we have here and the different weather conditions in which they can burn, there's usually something we can do as long as it's not actively dumping rain. So we were set back on, I would say, really our oak woodland burns this year didn't really get to happen because of all the moisture, and some other forest burns, but quite a bit of redwood burning got done across Sonoma County this year, even with all of the rain, because there were those pockets of dry spells in between.
Sun came out occasionally.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, someone out there is listening, is saying, what does that mean, a redwood burn? Can you be a little short explanation of what that means?
Are we actually burning redwood trees?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So there are prescribed burns that exist where we are trying to kind of burn the canopy because those ecosystems are adapted to a full regeneration from the ground. So chaparral is one of those. Or if there's been an invasion of an ecosystem by a different ecosystem, which happens across kind of the Midwest quite a bit. You're trying to kill eastern red cedars that are growing in the tall grass prairie. Here we have our version of that in the coastal prairie, which is a really diverse and very threatened ecosystem. We get encroachment due to lack of disturbance by grazing or fire of coyote brush and then Douglas fir trees. So we are trying to actually, in those cases, kill the brush, kill the fir trees, and reopen these coastal prairies. But in other cases, and this is the most common treatments that we do, I'd say, we're like in a redwood burn, in an oak woodland burn, we're trying to burn out the accumulation of dead materials underneath the trees while supporting those mature trees and the kind of intermediate age trees to continue thriving. And we're building resilience so that when we're in the drier season, those trees are better protected. The trees are better spaced, so they're more resilient to drought and they're more resilient to pathogens. And we can see just a general ecosystem health improvement by reintroducing fire to the understory. Redwoods are a little bit weird and people get a little bit nervous around them. And to your point earlier where you were saying, like you can see this patch flare up on a prescribed burn and you're really, you're kind of worried about it. It looks like they're expecting it. This happens all the time in this effort, and especially with redwoods. Redwoods have that really, we're looking at one right here, really fibrous bark that's like really hairy, right? It's like gorilla hair or something on the bark. If you go to an old growth redwood forest, they all have fire scars looking up the trunks, and so they're less fibrous. But if you go to, a second growth forest that's been harvested and clear cut and it doesn't have fire on it, all of those trunks are really fibrous. So when we introduce fire, even in the middle of winter, even as rain's coming in, the initial look of a redwood understory burn is it burns very short flame lengths, like 3-inch flames just creeping along in the understory. It looks very peaceful, very beautiful. And then it gets to the bottom of a tree and it licks up the bark of the tree. And pretty soon the bark has flames going all the way up the trunk. But they're short flames. And what they're doing is they're burning off all that fibrous gorilla hair on the outside edge of the bark. And then it puts itself out. But if you're someone who's never seen fire intentionally lit and you walk up and you see these redwood trees with flames going all the way up the trunk, that's a little bit nerve-wracking, especially if you're trauma. Yeah, but then so we often have to hold someone's hand and be like, it's okay, watch it. It's okay. We can watch it. And, there are cases where, if we're burning near a neighborhood, we don't even want to let that happen. And so we'll call it at about 6 feet. We'll put it out and we'll make sure that charring only happens on the bottom. But what that charring is doing is adding resilience to that tree. Because then when a wildfire burns through, that gorilla hair isn't there. And fire is not going to lick up the same way. We keep fire out of the canopy when it's drier. And we have a better outcome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
My dad was a fire control technician in Redwood National Park in 1976.
Oh my
and
gosh.
They had 2 fires the entire summer he worked there. One was a grass fire caused by campers didn't put their campfire all the way out. The other was about the only way a redwood tree burns in Redwood National Park. It got struck by lightning. It was dead on the inside, burned all the way down, and then fell over. You have a 350-foot long fire effectively that you have to put out. But it's amazing to see how once they've actually experienced fire, they're more or less, it's like the bark's made out of asbestos once the gorilla hair burns off. It's really incredible.
Wait, is gorilla hair really what you call it?
No, that's just the term.
Okay. Actually, that's what I have redwood mulch in the backyard, and that's what they call it.
Yeah, there's a
gorilla
really
hair.
yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I totally picked that up from my colleague Brian Peterson. I give him full credit for that term, but it's a good descriptor for sure.
Because I've been described that way as well.
Now it's gorilla hair burn boss.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Sasha, could you speak to the one thing that really struck me doing controlled burns for the first time? It's slow burn, no pun intended, slow burn adrenaline rush. And also there's something incredibly primordial about, a campfire for one thing, but then seeing an entire field, mind you, controlled with everybody, on station, ready to respond if there are any issues. But it's an incredibly powerful thing to see a 10-acre parcel in the process of going through a controlled burn. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah. One thing that we see, a lot of the time is people are expecting it to be really intense and chaotic, and they show up, and we try whenever we can to have observer groups on these burns, and open it up for people to come watch, because so different from what
Totally
people
signing up for
imagine.
that.
We'd love to have you out.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, what it usually looks like is a pretty boring and very organized briefing. Everyone kind of moves into place and gets in position. We start burning a little bit at a time, and then it's almost this like meditative, orchestrated process of restoring these low flame lengths in a very orderly fashion across the landscape. And a lot of the time, observer groups get bored and walk away. but
That's a good thing.
Yeah, but others are. A reaction that we've seen more commonly in recent years with all the trauma around here is that people, even in the observer group, are having this like restorative, peaceful experience where they're seeing this completely other face of fire on the ground, where it's like visibly a benefit. You can see that these flame lengths are low. It's just kind of eating its way through those dead accumulated materials. It looks like it's tending, and you're seeing these people very meditatively and in an organized fashion applying that fire, and then watching it kind of do its thing and die down, and applying more. So I think it's been very healing for people to get the chance to come out to these prescribed burns and see what that looks like, this other face of fire.
Yeah. And we've kind of talked about it a little bit, but I think the primordial aspect of this is really an interesting thing. Again, can you expand on the fact that this isn't a new, there's maybe modern science to it, but it's not new technology. This is something that, native peoples, especially in California, but really across the planet, have been doing for, millennia.
Yeah.
What are you drawn from those, sort of ancient knowledges? How would those fires have looked, in the 1700s in Sonoma Valley before colonization and Western expansion, and how those fires have been different than what you're doing now, or is it would have been kind of looked the same, but maybe just without red flashing lights?
Yeah, those are good questions, and definitely fire is innate to all of us. Like the human race is what it is because of our use of fire, right? I arguably, there are probably other people who would say because of other reasons we are what we are. But...
Fermenting,
yeah,
fermenting fruit as
fermentation.
for preservation
there we
purposes.
Go. There's one.
And clean water.
Well, Sam, you got to ask, how did the natives figure out that a controlled burn was
right? That's
the
that
proper
is
thing to do?
How did those fires?
Yeah.
How did they start those fires? How did they control those fires? Maybe they didn't. Maybe or in different ways, right?
Yeah. So using fire for tending the landscape and for stewarding cultural resources has many different faces depending on the objectives and the ecosystem you're in. Many cultures around the world, women are the keepers of fire and tend using fire in terms of like tending resources. So, tending for basket resprouts, you're like burning at the bases of hazel bushes or other resprouting plants, and then burning under oak trees to steward acorns. And there are many different ways in which those are controlled. And that may just be the frequency with which fire is being applied to the landscape that's limiting the burn size, and then, using seasonality. So we do that kind of thing today in certain areas where we use fuel breaks or we use fuel transition. So we may burn a grassland that's at the end of summer, early fall. We get a rain, the forest is wet, and because it's shady, the understory of the forest stays wet. And the very next day, as soon as the sun pops out, the grass is dry because it's been dry all summer. So you can burn the grass, and without having a road or a trail or a bunch of people digging line, you can just burn the grass right into the forest and the fire goes out. And then vice versa in the fall or winter after the grass greens up and you have a gap in the rain, you can burn in the forest and the fire goes out when it hits the green grass, but the forest is dry from the gap in the rain. So you can kind of use these seasonal transitions and fuel transitions to control fire without putting in any physical boundaries.
That's so cool.
There are tribes in this region who describe lighting fire in oak woodlands from the bottom of a hill and letting fire burn through the oak woodland and tend it. I would not recommend that nowadays in areas that haven't been treated because they have so much fuel accumulated.
Right.
But it paints such a beautiful picture of how well tended these oak woodlands had been historically, for that to be a successful method and not kill those trees. Right. So that's something that I really am intrigued by, because that's traditional ecological knowledge that really paints a picture of the difference between what we're seeing on landscape now in our untended oak woodlands and what these oaks looked like when indigenous peoples were stewarding them regularly.
Yeah. Wow, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that we talk about wildlands and these undeveloped places as if the way they look now is the way they've always looked.
Right.
And that's not the case. These lands were tended and managed and stewarded by the people who lived here before, white people did, right?
Yeah. And it really speaks to the importance of people on these landscapes and the importance of, and the responsibility that we have if we're going to live here in tending these landscapes that depend on people to do so in order to be in balance and thrive and offer all the suite of ecosystem services we value in the landscapes we live in.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
It just blows me away that you can't really burn a redwood. You can actually burn the
gorilla hair.
The gorilla hair off.
Well, that's when it's wet. So this is why that work is important, because in the middle of summer or in late summer when it's really dry, they're very flammable species that fire is going to burn all the way through the bark, or can burn into the cambium. And you can still get some like resprouting on younger ones, but it seems like from what I've seen, and I need more science on this or more data, is that those old growth trees aren't as resilient in those wildfire conditions,
The big hot fires.
in those big hot fires. So like doing those treatments so that those risks are eliminated for them is really important in those wetter conditions, so that you're not having that impact.
So when you look at like a map of Sonoma County, and it sounds like the northwest part of the county, you're kind of doing this, but if you look at a map of Sonoma County, do you like draw a line of places that you would like to see burn? Because I think about this all the time, driving up in Moon Mountain District in the Mayacamas, going, that didn't burn in 17 and really, really needs it.
Right.
And especially, I think of specifically the area between Moon Mountain Road down into Agua Caliente in the Springs. That amazing fire break was built in the middle of 17 that was 100 feet wide and scraped down to the ground, and that's where there was amazing fire flower resprouted in 18 and 19. But that whole area that the fire was stopped at, that was suppressed, below that is now just like, is still this like dense shrubby chaparral, and that just looks like is gonna look like tinderbox come July 4th, right?
Yeah. Yep. I definitely do
you have
get
like
engaged
a
in that
map
exercise.
that you dream about and like
I
point
do.
to places?
I try to balance it. There's so much work to do now that getting caught up in the dreams of those units that would be really hard to make happen in even 10 years.
Those are your dreams.
Can
Sam.
take
My
away from the work
dreams.
to do now. So, but there are cases where, I'm driving through the county or I'm looking at a map and I see something where I'm like, okay, this is really cool. This is a good opportunity. And I do think I could do something about this in the next year or two. And I'll like pull up Onyx as an app, right? And you can like look at the landowner.
I love that app.
Yeah, I'll like look at the landowner. I'll be like, okay, how do I get a hold of this landowner? And there have been cases where I've reached out to people and said like, hey,
Here, let me bring it up.
would
To
you be
let-
interested?
I have it on my phone. I
Yeah.
pay
Here's
for
my-
the subscription.
It's
Me too.
useful.
Here's my hit list.
Yeah. So there are cases where I definitely do that, and I try to mostly stay in the realm of like, okay, what are ones that are actually feasible that I could make happen in the next couple of years? I know that the county is working on, like the big long-term plans for pre-fire efforts. And so for me, while they're working on those long-term plans, I want to be getting things happening now. Like we don't have time to be waiting for those dream units.
Right.
So let's have kind of a slight eye on the future toward those dream units. And I want our program to be moving toward that landscape scale big important treatments and prioritization, and I don't want that to hinder us getting as much done as possible now.
How is Fire Forward expanding?
Yeah, rapidly is one. Yeah, so we launched in 2017. We did our first prescribed burns. I started with Audubon Canyon Ranch in 2015 and immediately started planning our first cooperative prescribed burns. And it took until May 2017 for us to get those on the ground. And it was this enormous effort, the first time that this permitting process had been used recently in this region at all. And we identified that there's a huge need to build capacity for this effort. So we started doing that, built a gear cache, and started training people, building momentum. We started in a 3-sided carport where we had a bunch of gear hanging on the walls, and it did not last long.
Hey, so did Apple.
Yeah.
They started in a garage too.
Nice, perfect. Yeah, and then the team started growing. We had kind of this core team of planners and coordinators and people teaching these efforts. And then now we have an apprentice crew. We built our fellowship program. So that was kind of a next level of expansion, investing in people who are already doing stewardship work by giving them professional development. And then now we have an apprentice crew. So these are folks who have a 1-year paid full-time position learning how to do this process within our team, led by a crew lead who has a decade of really great wildland fire background. And then where we're hoping to go is really standing up an entire module. So looking at what would it look like if we built a prescribed fire module that is highly skilled in ecology and stewardship and prescribed fire and fuels, and knows these ecosystems and knows the players and cares about doing this work well, and focuses on prescribed burning as its core effort. And so we're working on standing up those modules as that next piece, because ultimately, if we're going to see a pace and scale shift in this work, we're going to need people with careers dedicated to putting this good fire on the ground. It's not going to be able to be sustainable or grow as much as we need it to just through volunteerism. And volunteerism alone as the method creates an equity gap. Not everyone has the resources to take vacation days or come volunteer their time or spend the money for boots just to volunteer, spend the money on and time on all the professional development it takes to come out on the fire line. So if we build career paths in this field, we can shift the culture and we can fix the equity, and we can put our money where our mouth is, balancing this suppression, many millions of dollars that go into the paramilitary suppression piece.
Billions.
Yeah, thank you. With some effort going in toward this like institutionalizing prescribed fire as a career path.
Are there other groups in California that do the same thing you guys are doing?
Yeah, similar. I'd say because we're all kind of grassroots nonprofit efforts, we all have a slightly different culture, a little bit of a different bent. I'd say that the Nature Conservancy has been kind of building this cooperative burn effort nationally for a while now. And then in California, there's Fire Forward, there's the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council has been doing this work for quite a while and doing it really well, and they've been a huge mentor for me as well in leading this program. And then the Hayfork Watershed Training Center is another one that has a fire program. So Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, Watershed Hayfork Training Center, ourselves, just in the last few years also the Tribal Eco Restoration Alliance. So these partners have kind of been forming and building and then teaming up over the last decade or so to really try to start making a difference in this effort. And we're all learning from each other all the time and listening.
So 3-part question here. But it's all about how to support Fire Forward. 1, if you want to become, trained, how do you do that? If you're a landowner in Sonoma County or in the region that you're, how do you access and start the process of doing that? And then 3, if you're none of those things or don't want to be on a fire line, or don't have land, but you're in, somewhere else in the world listening to this show going, the future of the wine that I drink depends on good fire, not bad fire. How do you support your efforts?
Yeah, great question. So our training courses, we're just about to set it up so that all of our courses through the end of 2024 are going to be listed on the website, and people will be able to see when they can apply to each of those courses.
What's the web address? Quick.
fireforward.org should
Okay.
get people there. Hopefully that's easy enough.
And they're on the gram.
Yes.
Fire.forward.
We are on the gram. So fireforward.org, people should be able to see our course list through end of 2024 and when they can apply and how. And then on that same webpage, we also have a link to a site visit form. So site visit like request survey basically, so people can put themselves in there. We have a lot of burns on our plate right now, so it may take a little bit for us to get back to people on that site visit form, but we do make our way through that, and that's a great way. And I'd say for anyone putting themselves on that, if people can do anything about like creating an initial map of their roads and trails and property and give that to us as part of that effort, that really helps nudge things along to the next step. Usually I'll say as part of that, we're looking for, mid-slope roads and trails do not make good control lines. So we're looking ideally for people who have enough property or a situated property that control lines may be on the top or bottom of topography. It's not always required, but sometimes it's really important. And then finally for, supporting us, we absolutely, like, private donations are a huge help to our program and allow us to have the flexibility to really do this work and be nimble and identify hurdles and pivot and knock them down. So donating to the program is hugely helpful as well.
Right on.
Cool.
Fireforward.org.
How can they donate? Do you have Venmo set up? Do you want a check? I mean, what?
Yeah, through the website, Audubon Canyon Ranch's website and the fireforward.org platform, which are all connected since we're a program of Audubon Canyon Ranch. That's a great way to donate. There's a Give Now button, I think, on there, or donate button.
Excellent.
Yeah.
And just as Cash shows up. Cash, the neighborhood pup.
He's so cute.
He'd be a good fire dog.
Yeah.
He's not a Dalmatian, but I could see him riding around on a fire truck.
Absolutely.
Do they still have those anymore? I know they have house dogs. And stuff.
I don't know. You know,
I never
the
see
like
any in the truck.
the classic Dalmatian in a fire truck thing. I don't know if did that ever really exist.
My dog Andy was a Dalmatian, and he ran away, and I'm sure that he
Joined
went
the
to
fire
the fire
department.
department.
Ran away to join the fire department.
That's perfect.
Been telling myself that for 52 years.
Oh.
Yes. Oh, Andy.
So, Sasha, any questions we have not answered?
Yeah, anything
or
that
asked?
you want to talk about that we haven't figured out how to ask?
Ooh, nothing's coming to mind. Those are great questions.
I think I got everything on
Y'all
Barbara's
nailed
list
it.
that she sent me. Barbara's the producer.
Yeah.
She sat over there drinking wine on her eye. Oh,
About what?
the Armstrong Wood. That's actually a great story that we talked about when we met.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, in regards to 2020, right?
Yeah, that was a really neat opportunity. So during that lightning storm that happened, and then we had the complex of lightning fires, I was in a wilderness first responder training when that all started, and got this flood of emails from the community of people that we've trained saying, hey, we're hearing that there is a shortage of firefighters, and you gave us the training to be firefighters. How can we go get involved and help? I think, in one day of sitting in this first responder class, I got something like 65 emails from people asking if they could do something to help with the firefighter shortage. And so that inspired me. I got kind of excited about the groundswell grassroots interest in making a difference. So we reached out to Northern Sonoma County Fire District, and they've been pretty good partners for quite a while now. And we coordinated to create a 20-person Type 2 hand crew, so a formal qualified firefighting hand crew, to go out and be part of that firefighting effort on the Wallbridge fire. So our team, Fire Forward, organized the crew and geared them up, and then we all got hired on through Northern Sonoma County Fire District and went out and responded. And we had this really cool, because of this grassroots community effort, we had this really cool mixture of folks who are all fire alarm trained and qualified and have good experience, but are also archaeologists, indigenous peoples, biologists, botanists, ecologists, all of these different things. So we had this really special additional set of skills, and we're able to get kind of prioritized toward very ecologically relevant assignments. So we ended up the first week of that fire in Armstrong Redwood State Park, supporting protecting those old growth trees, and doing like ecologically sensitive suppression through the state park. And then in the second week, we ended up out in this area called the Cedars, which has really beautiful, rare, like Sargent cypress and a bunch of rare manzanita and rare wildflowers that grow in that really weird soil system out there, and I don't remember the details of the soil. So that was a really cool assignment, getting to organize this community of people who just wanted to help. I think 43 people from the community filled spots on that 20-person crew over the 2-week period. And I think it really gave people a way to plug in so that they weren't feeling helpless, while also giving back and contributing.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Cool stuff.
Absolutely.
See more good smoke.
Very, very eye-opening. It's really amazing. Thank you so very much.
This was a good
Thanks
420
for
show,
having
right,
me.
John?
Dr. Sasha.
That's perfect.
It's all about good smoke.
Yes.
Sam
Good smoke.
Burn Boss Couture.
I like it.
That. Man,
I
you
can
gotta
see
have
it.
a card made.
Right.
Like that,
I'm
dude.
gonna get some new cards built, printed up before I have any qualifications. That's pretty much on brand.
Perfect.
I've been burning most of my life.
Hunk of burning love.
Yeah. I mean, you could just go on. And
Yes,
on.
it's so
Ad
the
infinitum.
fuel is heavy for the puns that we could come up with.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr.
Yeah.
Sasha.
Thank you so much for having me.
appreciated.
Yeah, this is-
Absolutely.
This is beyond my expectations on
Yeah.
this one. This was awesome. Thank you.
Truly.
Shout outs.
Total
Yeah.
joy.
Anything for you guys? Events coming up?
I have April 29th, the Garage tasting
right.
here in Sonoma. There's still some tickets available. I don't know. There's like 35 or 40 wineries, all under 1,000 cases. Some past guests of the podcast will be there. Darling Wines, Casey Graybell will be there.
The Granishta.
The Grenachista's under 1,000 cases.
Yeah.
He's good. He has like 2,000 Instagram followers for every case of wine he makes or something.
Yeah, I'll have to talk to him about who his followers are. So I got that, and I can't believe I'm finally saying this. I actually have labels coming next week. I've
Oh my
been
goodness.
promised them.
Nice.
So all of this wine that I keep drinking without labels is so good.
Shiner.
I'm going to share it with some people, hopefully. If you haven't-
Somebody spotted from my post yesterday. Somebody spotted a shiner on there.
Oh, the Zin.
Yeah.
The Zin from Marshall. Yeah.
Right.
Ah.
Or the
No, it was the
that's
blend,
right.
the red blend.
Yeah, that was the red blend. That was a great bottle of wine.
That'll be next week's show.
Next
people.
week's show. Right. We went out of order so that we could have the Good Smoke show
Nice.
That's
come
exactly
out
right.
this week.
Yeah.
And it's
That's
the
awesome.
day before Earth Day. The show drops the day before Earth Day,
Perfect.
and we're recording on 420.
Yeah.
Oh, and then
we're on brand.
Chef Cycle is coming up in, God, it's less than 3 weeks away. Sam, I don't know where you are in your kind of thoughts about it, but
Turns out I'm bottling that week.
good planning.
Saved by the reprieve bottling bell. Thank gosh. So I will be donating and probably not
Yes.
participating.
Heavily.
Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
right.
Thank
you
you,
know
Eric
what?
and Caitlin.
You know what? What's all that really matters is the donating.
So how can people there'll be links on all the Instagrams and
Yeah,
we'll send out to the email lists.
yeah.
Donate.
Donate.
No kid hungry.
It's linked on my my Instagram and my Facebook. We've reworked our team now. We have Chef Dusty Estes is kind of somehow
Butcher Baker Bottler.
yeah, Butcher Baker Bottler.
Such a better team name than the previous one.
So much better. But the previous one was a lot of fun for the little short amount of time.
It had history.
Yeah. So anyway, that's it here.
All right, man.
Way in advance, but we're
Way.
going to start promoting it now because it's such a big deal. September 17th, it's part of our Grenache Day celebration, Tacos du Rhone. Grammy Award-winning jazz vocalist Catherine Russell, who is also happens to be a family friend, changed
All
my
right.
brother's diapers and such, at the barn on Denmark
I'm sure
Street.
he wants everybody to know that.
Yes, he does. Well, my brother, he's a very public person. He likes to talk and, you know.
Oh,
very-
yeah. I've noticed.
Have you ever even met him?
Yeah.
Okay.
Once.
Or
twice, yeah.
That sounds all right. So, yeah, Catherine Russell, September 17th, the Denmark Street Barn. Make your travel arrangements around it. The ticket link will be out soon. And that'll be all part of a Grenache weekend celebration. Grenache Day is the 15th of September, Friday the 15th.
Excellent.
There's going to be a big dinner. I don't know if John Toolsy started to promote it yet, but
But
we're
he
doing
gave
it.
us the thumbs up to start promoting.
Okay, so Saturday night, a sort of secret out in the field kind of dinner party where you buy a ticket and then you find out like the morning of where you get to go.
Right.
That'll be all Grenache. And we'll be doing something Friday in the tasting room, hanging out, drinking Grenache all weekend.
Right.
You
And
make
then
Grenache?
Friday
15th,
night
16th. Yes, I make Grenache, and Bart makes Chenin Blanc.
Right.
It's
and Grenache.
and Grenache from the Rossi Ranch, the Tokalon of Grenache.
The Tokalon of Grenache. You know what I loved about that? It was the Napa Valley vintner is who said it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So we can get away with repeating it.
Right,
We couldn't have
exactly.
said it on our own.
No.
But Tony Biaggi,
Right.
famous Napa hotshot
Right.
winemaker, hotshot, see, can say Tokalon for Grenache, and we just go, yes.
Yes.
We'll
Of
take
course.
that to
Absolutely.
the bank.
And in a couple years, it may not have been Tony that said it. It might have been somebody else.
Right, exactly.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening to the Winemakers. We will see you next week. Special thanks to Tristan for sitting in for
Guest
Brian.
host.
Thanks.
Sam Burnboss.
Burn boss.
Yes.
Bart.
I'm going to go burn some
And
boss right now.
Dr.
All right.
Sasha Berleman. Thank you so very much.
Thanks for
And
having
Barbara, thanks again.
Our producer,
You-
executive
yeah,
producer, Barbara
absolutely.
Gorder.
me.
All right, kids. Peace and love. We'll talk to you next week.